It was a typical Thursday when I noticed something strange. The empty jewelry box sitting on my dresser was a glaring reminder of a conversation I had been avoiding for weeks. I had been out of town for work, and when I came back, everything seemed out of place. My father's heirlooms, the family treasures that had been passed down through generations, were gone. The necklace my grandmother had worn at her wedding, the rings my father had promised to me on his deathbed, and the cufflinks that had belonged to my great-grandfather, all of them, vanished. I stood there staring at the empty velvet-lined box, disbelief starting to settle in. The question was simple: who could have taken them? My stepmother, Charlotte, had been living with us for nearly 5 years after my mother passed. I had no real affection for her, though I tried to get along for the sake of keeping peace in the house. But now, with my family's irreplaceable items gone, that peace felt like a distant memory. I'd never trusted Charlotte, and there were whispers over the years about her desire to get her hands on the family estate. My father, bless his heart, had always been kind and forgiving. He never saw the greed in Charlotte's eyes, but I saw it. I had to wonder, was this her doing? I quickly checked the drawer where my father had kept important papers, including a detailed inventory of his estate. Everything seemed to be in order except for one glaring detail. There was a small gap in the document. My father's written record didn't list all the items I knew had been passed down to me. That wasn't a mistake. Someone had carefully removed the jewelry from the list as well. Panic set in. Could this be happening? Had she really taken what wasn't hers? I grabbed my phone and called her, my fingers trembling. She picked up on the first ring. "Charlotte, where's the jewelry?" My voice was steady, but my heart raced. There was a brief silence on the other end, and then her voice, calm and calculated, replied, "What jewelry?" I couldn't believe it. "You know what I'm talking about. The heirlooms, my family's jewelry. They're missing." "Oh, that," she said, her voice almost sweet. "I had to sell it. The estate was in disarray, and the money will help pay for some of the repairs. You should be grateful, really. We need the funds." Grateful? Was she serious? My grandmother's necklace, my father's ring, sold without my permission? My mind raced through every possible scenario, but one thing was clear: Charlotte had crossed a line. "You sold them without asking me?" I asked, my voice tight as my anger began to boil over. She didn't even sound sorry. "I'm doing what needs to be done. This isn't just about you anymore." Her words stung, but I kept my composure. This wasn't the time for an emotional outburst. I had to think. "Charlotte, I want them back," I said, my voice even. "Now." She laughed lightly on the other end. "I'm afraid it's a little too late for that." I ended the call with a quiet, shaking breath. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't over. Charlotte had made a critical mistake. She didn't realize the one thing she'd underestimated: me. I sat quietly for a moment, taking deep breaths. I had to think this through carefully. Charlotte thought she had gotten away with it, but what she didn't know was that she had just made a grave mistake. I had something she didn't know about, a hidden vault that had been part of my father's legacy, a vault that only I knew about. The jewelry wasn't the only thing that had been passed down to me. My father had always been meticulous about safeguarding our family's history, ensuring that even the most priceless artifacts were protected. When I was old enough, he'd shown me the vault's location, explaining how it had been hidden within the walls of the old library, behind a secret panel no one could access without the right knowledge. Over the years, I'd maintained the secret, only visiting the vault when I needed to. It wasn't that I didn't trust Charlotte, though, frankly, I didn't, but rather because I respected the family's legacy too much to let anyone, least of all her, disrupt it. And now, her actions had finally forced my hand. I grabbed the old key from my desk drawer and made my way to the library. The house was eerily quiet as I walked through the long hallway, each step echoing off the hardwood floors. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that hung heavy in the air. I had never been close to Charlotte, but this was something I wasn't going to let slide. As I approached the library, the dim light from the chandelier above cast long shadows across the room. The antique furniture was covered in dust sheets, an indication of how little it had been used in recent years. The bookshelves lined the walls, holding a mix of old tomes, family records, and forgotten journals. But in the far corner, near the fireplace, was the panel, the one my father had shown me. It had always looked like just another piece of wood, blending seamlessly into the wall, but I knew better. I carefully pressed the hidden latch on the panel and heard a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing the small steel safe-like vault that lay behind it. I'd never shown it to anyone. No one but my father knew of its existence. Now it was time for me to use it. I stepped inside the hidden chamber, and there it was, the safe, as solid and imposing as ever. A sense of calm washed over me. This was my father's final gift to me. This vault was my backup, my last line of defense. And now it was time to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I typed the code into the lock, feeling a rush of adrenaline as the safe door swung open. Inside, the family jewelry, along with several other priceless heirlooms, sat neatly organized in velvet-lined boxes. But more importantly, my father's will, hidden amongst the treasures, was there, waiting for me. The documents would prove that I was the rightful heir to everything in the house, not just the jewelry, but the estate itself. Charlotte had no idea what she had just started. She thought she could get away with taking what didn't belong to her, but she had no idea what I was about to reveal. As I closed the vault and replaced the panel, I felt a rush of determination. I had the evidence, the jewels, and the power now. Charlotte might have thought she could play me, but she had just made a grave mistake. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. I left the library, the weight of my discovery sinking in. Now I just had to figure out how to confront her. The next step was clear. She was going to learn exactly who she was dealing with. The following day, I decided to confront Charlotte. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. She was a master of deflection, capable of turning any conversation to her favor. But this time, there would be no wiggle room. I had the leverage, and it was time to make her understand that. I waited until the late afternoon, when the house was quiet, and everyone had settled into their routine. Charlotte was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, her usual way of trying to take control of things, pretending to be the perfect homemaker. But as I approached her from behind, I could feel the tension in my chest building. Today, the game would change. I cleared my throat as I stood in the doorway, and her head snapped up, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "What is it now, darling?" she asked, as though everything was normal, as though she hadn't just sold off my family's history. "I know what you did," I said, my voice steady but firm. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to make a scene. Charlotte had underestimated me for far too long. It was time to make my point. She dropped the knife she was holding with a clatter, her smile faltering. But she quickly recovered, adopting that same calm, condescending tone she always used when trying to talk her way out of things. "What are you talking about?" she asked, the fake sweetness in her voice so thick it was almost nauseating. "You sold the jewelry, my family's jewelry," I said, walking further into the kitchen. I felt no fear, only resolve. "You took it and sold it without even asking me. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Charlotte's eyes narrowed, her face paling. She knew the game was up, but she wasn't about to admit it so easily. "I did what I had to do," she said, still trying to hold on to that air of superiority. "The house needed repairs, the estate was falling apart, we need the money." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly, deliberately. "You needed the money. You sold my family's treasures for your own benefit. You didn't even think to consult me. You didn't care that those items, those pieces of history, were more than just jewelry to me." Her posture stiffened, but I wasn't finished. "You took what wasn't yours to take, Charlotte," I continued, stepping closer. "But here's the thing you didn't know." I watched her face as the words sank in, waiting for the realization to hit. "I have a vault," I said, my voice low but full of power. "A vault hidden in the library. It holds more than just jewelry, and it's been there for years. The family legacy you thought you could erase, the one you thought you could steal. Well, it's still here. Everything that matters is still here." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "A vault?" she stammered. "What are you—" "Everything you sold was only a fraction of what I have," I interrupted, walking closer to her. "I've kept the real family heirlooms safe for years. My father showed me the vault when I was old enough. You never knew about it, and you never will." I could see her trying to process the information, her mind racing. You think you can just—" "I'm not just thinking," I said firmly, stepping back and crossing my arms. I've already taken steps to ensure everything is legally mine, and now you're going to return what you've sold? Or else you'll regret it." Charlotte's face twisted in frustration. "You can't do this," she hissed, her tone turning ugly. "You think you can just scare me with some vault? You think you're going to control me? I'm your stepmother and I'm your stepdaughter," I said coldly, cutting her off. "And I'm telling you now, you made a mistake. This isn't your house, it's mine. It always has been." The room was silent for a long moment. Charlotte was breathing heavily, her mind clearly trying to work through the implications of what I'd just revealed. Her grip on the kitchen counter tightened, and for a second, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she simply nodded, her eyes darkening with disdain. "You won't win," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're going to regret this." I stood tall, my gaze unwavering. "We'll see about that." With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there, simmering in her anger and realization. But I knew the battle wasn't over. Charlotte might have thought she was in control, but I had the upper hand now. Let me know when you're ready for the next part. The days following my confrontation with Charlotte were filled with an unsettling quiet. She had retreated into herself, no longer playing the role of the sweet, passive stepmother. I could feel the tension building between us, but she was careful, too careful, around me now. She knew I wasn't bluffing, and that terrified her. I, on the other hand, had never felt more certain of my decisions. My father's legacy was secure, and Charlotte's greed was no longer going to dictate the narrative. But the immediate question now was how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine, and how I could force Charlotte to return the stolen jewelry. The first step was to enlist the help of a lawyer. I didn't trust Charlotte enough to give her any more opportunities to manipulate the situation, and I needed someone who could navigate the complexities of the estate. I had no idea just how far Charlotte was willing to go to avoid the fallout, but I had a feeling this wasn't over. I met with my lawyer, a sharp and experienced woman named Angela, who had been my family's legal counsel for years. She was calm and collected, and most importantly, she understood the gravity of the situation. The first thing she did was review my father's will and the documents that had been left behind. The details were clear. Everything in the house, including the jewelry, was to be passed on to me. It wasn't just a matter of family heirlooms. It was a matter of legal rights. "We're going to have to be strategic about this," Angela said, looking over the papers with a practiced eye. "Charlotte has already crossed a line by selling the jewelry. Technically, that's theft. But we'll need proof, solid proof, that it was intentionally taken and sold without your consent." I nodded. "I'm already a step ahead. I've secured a vault where the rest of the treasures are kept, things Charlotte has no idea about. We need to get ahead of this before she tries anything else." Angela leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. "You have a vault?" I smiled slightly. "Yes, a hidden vault. My father showed it to me years ago. It's been my insurance policy, and now it's time to use it." She raised an eyebrow. "And you're certain that it contains the rest of the jewelry, along with the will?" "I'm sure," I replied. "It's not just jewelry. There are other documents that'll prove Charlotte never had the right to sell anything. I'm ready to fight for what's mine." Angela's face softened, and she placed a hand on the stack of papers in front of her. "You're doing the right thing, but we need to act fast. If Charlotte gets wind of what you're planning, she may try to cover her tracks. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be to prove anything." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal preparations, phone calls, and meetings. I was determined not to let Charlotte get away with this, but I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. As I prepared the final pieces of evidence and made arrangements to meet with Angela again, I couldn't help but think about the next confrontation. Charlotte had underestimated me, but she would soon realize that I wasn't just going to roll over and let her steal from me. One evening, as I was going through some old family records in the study, I heard Charlotte's footsteps behind me. I turned slowly, bracing myself for whatever game she was about to play. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I know what you're planning," she said, her voice low, "and I won't let you win." I met her gaze, unwavering. "You've already lost, Charlotte." Her face twisted with fury, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "You think you've won. You think you have all the power. You're just a little girl playing in a grown-up's game. I'll make sure you regret this." I didn't flinch. You've underestimated me for far too long. But don't worry, I'll make sure you get what's coming to you." And with that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. I knew this was far from over, but I was ready. I had the law on my side, and the hidden vault gave me the upper hand. Now, I just needed to make Charlotte realize that. The weeks dragged on, but my resolve only strengthened. Charlotte's threats grew more frequent, but I was undeterred. I knew she was desperate. She had underestimated me from the beginning, thinking I was just another pawn in her game. But now, I was playing a different game, one that she couldn't even begin to understand. My lawyer, Angela, and I had been working on a strategy. It was clear that Charlotte wasn't going to hand over the stolen jewelry without a fight, so we had to be prepared for anything. We'd collected all the necessary evidence, the family records, the inventory of the estate, and the crucial documents from the vault. But now, it was time to take the next step. I arranged to meet Charlotte the following Friday afternoon at the house. I knew she would be there, trying to assert control, pretending everything was still as it had always been. But it wouldn't be. Not anymore. When I walked into the house that afternoon, I felt a sense of purpose that was both liberating and terrifying. Charlotte was sitting in the living room, her usual smug expression on her face. As soon as she saw me, she straightened up, clearly expecting me to back down. I didn't waste any time. "I'm done with the games," I said, my voice cold. "It's time for you to return what you've taken." Her eyes flicked to the floor before meeting mine again, a flash of annoyance crossing her face. "You really think you can just walk in here and demand things from me? You think you've won," she sneered. "No," I replied, stepping closer. "But I think you're about to find out that I have everything I need to make you give it all back. And I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done." Charlotte's expression shifted, the anger bubbling up beneath her calm facade. "You think I'm afraid of you? You've always been the baby of the family, thinking you could just play by your own rules? You've never known what it's like to truly run things." Her words were meant to provoke me, but they only reinforced what I already knew. She didn't have the upper hand anymore. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice unwavering. "I may be the baby of the family, but I've learned what it takes to protect what's mine, and I'm not letting you take anything else from me." Charlotte's face reddened with rage, but she didn't move. She had nothing left to say. I took a deep breath and continued. "You sold the jewelry. That was your first mistake. But your second mistake was underestimating me. I have the legal documentation, the vault, and everything I need to prove that what you took was never yours to sell." For a moment, she just stared at me, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Then she finally spoke, her voice dripping with venom. "You don't scare me. I'm not giving it back. I've already sold it, and I won't go back on my word." I shook my head slowly, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "You may have sold it, but you didn't sell it legally. I've already spoken with my lawyer. The sale wasn't authorized, and I'm prepared to take you to court if I have to." Her eyes widened for a split second, just enough for me to see that she was finally starting to panic. She wasn't used to being on the defensive. "You wouldn't dare," she said, though her voice lacked the conviction it had moments before. "I already have," I replied. "I've already filed the claim, and I'm prepared to follow through." Her facade finally cracked. She rose from her seat and began to pace the room, her mind clearly racing. "You think you can just take everything from me?" she muttered, half to herself. I crossed my arms and stood my ground. "You took from me first, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes narrowed with a new kind of fury. "You're playing a dangerous game, you know that?" I stood firm. "And I'm winning." She glared at me, trying to decide whether to back down or continue fighting. I could see her calculating her next move, but I had already won. Charlotte had no idea that the moment she sold those jewels, she had sealed her own fate. The law was on my side, the documents were secure, and the vault held everything I needed to prove I was the rightful heir. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence in the room was deafening, but it was the silence of a battle already lost. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice softer now, but laced with defeat. "You'll regret this. You'll regret pushing me to this point." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The damage was done, and Charlotte was too late to stop it. The following weeks were a blur of phone calls, legal documents, and the slow grind of the legal system. Angela and I worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable courtroom battle. Charlotte, as expected, had lawyered up and was determined to fight back. But I was no longer afraid. I had the truth on my side, and that was a weapon more powerful than anything she could throw at me. Our legal team began gathering the evidence. We had photographs, family records, detailed inventories of all the items I was claiming, and even the list of the jewelry Charlotte had sold. The most important piece, though, was the documentation from the hidden vault. Angela had ensured everything was airtight, and we were ready for whatever Charlotte's team would throw our way. It wasn't long before Charlotte received the official notification. A week after our last confrontation, I was served with a summons to appear in court. The message was clear. Charlotte was going to fight me, no matter the cost. The day of the court hearing arrived, and as I stood outside the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Charlotte, of course, was there, flanked by her expensive attorneys and exuding an air of confidence. But I wasn't intimidated. My family's legacy was worth more than any of her tricks, and I knew this fight was mine to win. The trial began, and the tension in the room was palpable. Charlotte's lawyer, a slick man who looked like he could talk his way out of anything, immediately began spinning a story of how I was merely overreacting to a minor mistake. He tried to paint me as someone too young to understand the complexities of the estate, and accused me of trying to undermine Charlotte's efforts to improve the house. But Angela was prepared. She stood firm, presenting all the evidence we had gathered. She detailed the sale of the jewelry and how Charlotte had circumvented the proper procedures to take it. Most importantly, Angela presented the documentation from the vault, proving that Charlotte had no right to claim any part of the estate. Charlotte's lawyer countered, but it was clear he was on the defensive. The courtroom atmosphere shifted as Angela's arguments grew stronger. We had the legal documentation, the photographs, and the testimony to back everything up. Charlotte's position was crumbling, and she knew it. The most significant moment came when I was called to testify. I stood tall as I took the stand, speaking clearly and confidently about my family's legacy and how Charlotte had betrayed that trust. I talked about the vault, how it had been passed down to me by my father, and how I had always protected it, even from Charlotte's prying eyes. As I spoke, I could see the look on Charlotte's face. Her once confident demeanor had faltered. She was now visibly sweating, trying to hide her anxiety behind a forced smile. The game had changed. She was losing. Angela's closing argument sealed the deal. She spoke with authority and precision, reminding the court that Charlotte's actions were not only illegal, but an outright betrayal of the family's legacy. Charlotte had overplayed her hand, thinking she could simply take what didn't belong to her and get away with it. By the end of the day, the judge had ruled in my favor. Charlotte was ordered to return all the stolen items, and I was granted full control over the estate. I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders as the court adjourned. The battle was over, and I had won. Charlotte didn't take the loss well. I knew she wouldn't. She had spent years plotting her next move, thinking she could outsmart me and take everything from my family. But the reality of her defeat hit her harder than I expected. The days following the court ruling were filled with chaos for Charlotte. She tried to rally support, reaching out to her friends in the legal and social circles she had cultivated over the years, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and she was now seen for what she truly was, a woman who had betrayed her family for personal gain. Word of the court case quickly spread. Our neighbors, family friends, and even distant relatives reached out, offering their support. The story of Charlotte's betrayal became a cautionary tale, one that would be told for years to come. Her reputation, which she had spent so long building, unraveled in a matter of days. For me, the victory was bittersweet. I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine, but it had come at a great emotional cost. The woman who had once been my stepmother was now nothing more than a shadow of her former self, reduced to a pariah in the community. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. No matter how much I had won, I had lost something too. Trust, respect, and a sense of family that could never be replaced. As for the jewelry, I had it all returned. Everything Charlotte had stolen from me, along with the other heirlooms hidden in the vault. It was a strange feeling, holding those precious items in my hands again. They were still valuable, of course, but they had become symbols of something deeper. They represented my family's legacy, and they reminded me of the lengths I was willing to go to protect that. The story didn't end with Charlotte's fall. No, the real story was just beginning. I had learned a valuable lesson through all of this, that my family's history, my legacy, was worth fighting for. And no one, not Charlotte, not anyone, could take that from me. With the case behind me, I began to focus on rebuilding what had been torn apart. The estate was mine once more, and I knew it was time to honor my family's legacy in a way that Charlotte had never understood. I took the time to go through everything, from the old family records to the pieces of jewelry that had been passed down through the generations. Each item told a story, stories of love, sacrifice, and perseverance. But it wasn't just about the physical possessions. It was about restoring my sense of self. For so long, I had let Charlotte's presence in my life dictate my happiness. I had allowed her to take up space in my heart, even as she took everything else from me. Now I was reclaiming that space. I was reclaiming my life. I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take what was rightfully mine again, not just the jewelry, but my own worth. I would never allow myself to be underestimated again. And most importantly, I would never forget the lessons I had learned through this journey. A few months later, I sat in the family's grand living room, looking out at the estate that had been the center of so much turmoil. But it was also the center of something new, my future. The phone rang, breaking my reverie. I picked it up, expecting another call from the lawyer, but it was a familiar voice. "Angela." "We did it," she said, her voice full of warmth. "You've got a bright future ahead of you. The legacy is yours now. It's time to make your own mark." And with that, I knew I was ready. Ready to start a new chapter. Ready to take the legacy I had inherited and use it to build something even greater.